An invisible waitress becomes the key player in a web of secrets and twists that threatens to destroy a billionaire empire. But what Maggie Turner uncovers goes beyond corruption. It ties to her own family's past and could cost her life. Maggie Turner was the kind of person the world seemed not to notice. At a luxurious New York restaurant, where the glasses gleamed as brightly as the client's jewelry, Maggie moved between tables like a shadow. To others, she was just another waitress, someone who asked if the steak was cooked to their liking or if they wanted more wine. But to her, every night there was a battlefield. Between the tips and obligatory smiles, Maggie struggled to keep up with the bills and care for her grandmother, her only family, who was becoming increasingly frail. Maggie's life followed a quiet, almost resigned rhythm, but her eyes held stories no one bothered to ask about. The restaurant, with its opulent atmosphere and muffled conversations, was a place where secrets seemed to float in the air but never reached her. Between taking orders, Maggie sometimes dreamed of a different life, far from there. Yet, no matter how far her thoughts wandered, something always pulled her back: the past, which weighed on her like an anchor. Her grandmother, once full of vitality, now spent her days between medications and confused memories. Maggie did her best to keep smiling, even when the bills arrived or when the feeling of being ignored by the world became unbearable. And despite everything, she was driven by an invisible force, a stubborn desire to prove that her life didn't have to be defined by circumstances. But how? That was the question that echoed every time she lay down, exhausted, after work. However, there was something about the restaurant that, in a way, fascinated Maggie. It was as if the place were a showcase of lives she would never live. Men in impeccable suits and women wearing expensive perfumes discussed business and destiny. Among the practiced smiles and clinking glasses, she could sense that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. People, no matter how polished, carried secrets. That much Maggie knew. What she didn't know was how those secrets would forever change her life. In that setting, Maggie's life seemed a cruel contrast. The luxury around her and the simplicity she could barely sustain. Even so, she refused to let bitterness consume her. "My time will come," she thought, not knowing if it was optimism or a desperate prayer. While drying a glass, her eyes met those of the clients. They hardly noticed her existence. And ironically, it was this invisibility that would make her essential soon. Behind her apron, Maggie carried a courage she didn't even recognize in herself. It was the courage of someone who faced difficulties daily without breaking. But there was something else too. A stubbornness she inherited from her father, a man who, as she vaguely remembered, never accepted injustice silently. Sometimes Maggie wondered if he would be proud of her if he were alive. But what she really wanted to know was, what happened to him on that fateful day? The restaurant's hallways were silent witnesses to Maggie's thoughts, but they would also become the stage for something unexpected. Between loud laughter and the clinking of cutlery, fate was about to collide with her in a cruel and transformative way. She, so accustomed to being unnoticed, was only steps away from a turning point that would turn her life upside down. That restaurant wouldn't just be the place where she worked, it would become the epicenter of an earthquake that would unearth buried secrets. As the city buzzed with its incessant noise, Maggie tried not to succumb to the idea that her life would always be like this, a constant patchwork. But something, an almost imperceptible sensation, made her heart beat faster. Maybe it was the desire for change, or perhaps it was the premonition that something big was about to happen. And though she didn't know it yet, that change was right there, lurking, ready to reveal itself when she least expected it. It was an ordinary night at the restaurant, or at least it seemed to be. Maggie moved between tables, balancing trays and practicing the polite smile she had mastered. When she reached Nathan Carter's table, a famous billionaire who exuded power and confidence, she barely had time to register the details. The luxurious watch, the cold gaze, the impeccable posture. He wasn't the kind of client Maggie expected to impress. But the night had other plans. During a brief break, Maggie stepped into the women's restroom, trying to cool her head. The exhausting work and worries about her grandmother consumed her. Then, amidst the silence, she heard voices. They weren't gossip or casual chatter. They were words filled with tension, laced with malice and secrets. She recognized one of the voices, Sophia, a frequent figure at the restaurant, always impeccably dressed and surrounded by influential people. Sophia was speaking with a man, probably her lawyer, Maggie guessed. They discussed something about document manipulation, strategies to frame Nathan Carter, and exposing him as the culprit in a financial scandal. Maggie froze, her heart racing. She shouldn't have been listening, but she couldn't move. The words hung in the air like bombs ready to explode, and every detail seemed worse than the last. For a moment, Maggie questioned whether she had misunderstood the conversation. But there was no room for doubt. Sophia's intentions were clear: to destroy Nathan Carter. The waitress felt a chill run down her spine. Why did she have to overhear something so dangerous? Her life was complicated enough. Intervening in this plan seemed insane. But how could she simply ignore it? As she returned to the dining area, the words echoed in her mind. Maggie observed Nathan from a distance, still unaware of the conspiracy. He seemed untouchable, but she knew it was just a facade. And now? She could pretend nothing happened, but every step felt heavier, as if her own conscience were pulling her back to reality. What she had overheard wasn't something she could easily forget. The restaurant, which had once seemed like just a stage for luxury and ostentation, suddenly took on a darker atmosphere. Maggie looked at Sophia, now sitting at a table with friends, laughing as if she were untouchable. The contrast between the lightness of her demeanor and the venom of her words made Maggie tremble. So much was at stake, and she was just a waitress. Who would believe her? As she served the tables, Maggie tried to ignore the growing feeling that something bigger was at play. She glanced at Nathan, questioning the kind of man he was. Did he deserve her help? And Sophia? What else was this woman capable of? Maggie didn't know, but one thing was clear. The secrets she overheard could change everything, not just for Nathan but for herself too. That night, Maggie realized her life, which seemed so far removed from the intrigues of the rich and powerful, was about to intertwine with a world she barely understood. And deep down, something nagged at her. If she did nothing, could she live with the weight of it? But if she chose to act, what would the consequences be? Fate seemed to be nudging Maggie as if whispering, "Choose." Now, each moment of hesitation seemed to magnify the stakes. The humble waitress, who barely had time for herself, now had a decision in her hands, one that could turn her life completely upside down. Maggie barely slept that night. Lying on the small sofa beside her grandmother's bed, her thoughts wouldn't stop racing. She replayed every word she had overheard in the restaurant bathroom. How could such a casual conversation, so full of secrets, carry such an unbearable weight? The doubts suffocated her. What could a waitress like her possibly do against such powerful people? Deep down, Maggie wanted to believe it wasn't her problem. Nathan Carter, with all his wealth and influence, could handle it on his own. Why should I get involved? She muttered to herself, staring at the ceiling where the street lamp's light cast dancing shadows. But it wasn't that simple. Her conscience wouldn't let her rest. The next morning, as she prepared tea for her grandmother, Maggie tried to organize her thoughts. Maybe I'm overreacting, she thought as the kettle whistled. But even as she repeated it like a mantra, the knot in her stomach remained. Something about that conversation seemed more serious, darker than she wanted to admit. But who could she turn to? Throughout the day, her questions turned into excuses. Maggie mentally listed all the reasons why she shouldn't act. I'm just a waitress. Who would believe me? What if Sophia finds out I spoke? What if? The list went on endlessly, but none of the answers brought her relief. She knew she was running away, but fear paralyzed her. At work, Maggie tried to act normal, but her movements were hesitant. Her coworkers noticed something was off, but no one asked. After all, everyone there had their own problems. Maggie carried trays and cleared plates as usual, but her mind was miles away. Every time she passed Nathan's table, she felt a shiver of nervousness and hesitation. What if it was a mistake to try to warn him? Nathan Carter didn't seem like the kind of man who would listen to a waitress. He would probably ignore her or, worse, laugh in her face. Maggie knew the risk of exposing herself was enormous. Sophia wasn't just powerful, she was ruthless. Maggie had already seen that from a distance, in the way Sophia dealt with people who dared to challenge her. At the same time, something else bothered Maggie. What if she did nothing? What would happen to Nathan? What if Sophia's plan succeeded? The weight of doubt felt heavier than the fear of acting. But even so, she hesitated. It was easier to convince herself that it wasn't the right time, that someone more qualified would eventually handle the situation. As she organized the silverware at the restaurant that evening, Maggie looked at her reflection in a polished tray. She barely recognized the woman staring back. There was exhaustion, but also something new. A spark of restlessness, as if a part of her, the braver part, was trying to emerge. But courage wasn't enough to face Sophia, was it? At the end of her shift, as Maggie walked home, she stopped for a moment in the middle of the sidewalk. The city's cold wind brushed against her face, but she didn't feel it. In her mind, one question kept repeating. If it were Dad in my place, what would he do? The answer seemed obvious, but that didn't make her decision any easier. Maggie knew the choice was in her hands. She could continue her invisible life, far from other people's problems, or she could risk everything for something greater. But fear was still strong, and her courage felt so small. Doubt lingered like a shadow, always present, always whispering, "Are you ready for this?" That night, as Maggie tried to rest on the sofa, she heard her grandmother call her with a voice weak but full of warmth. "Maggie, sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked, sensing her granddaughter's unease. Maggie smiled, trying to mask her feelings, but she couldn't fool the woman who had raised her. "I'm fine, Grandma, just a long day," she replied. But her grandmother persisted, "There's something in your eyes. Something you're trying to hide." Without knowing why, Maggie began to speak. She didn't share the details but let slip that she had heard something at work that left her uneasy, something involving justice and danger. Her grandmother, with the wisdom of someone who had lived many lives, responded with impressive calm. "Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that define who we really are." Maggie felt a pang in her chest. Her grandmother had always known how to say the right words, but this time, they seemed to carry a greater weight. As they drank tea together, Maggie's grandmother shared a story from her youth, about a time when she faced injustices to protect a friend in trouble. "I was scared, Maggie, just like you are now. But I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting even when we're trembling inside." Those words echoed in Maggie's mind, even after her grandmother had fallen asleep. It was as if she had found an anchor amidst the chaos. The next day at work, her grandmother's words continued to resonate. Maggie realized something. She didn't have to be a perfect hero, she just needed to take the first step. Still, the fear lingered. As she set up the tables before her shift, she thought about how she might approach Nathan without sounding crazy. Every scenario she imagined ended in rejection or danger. During her break, Maggie looked at the small pendant she always wore, a gift from her father. It was a simple object, but full of meaning. Her father had always been her greatest example of integrity, and Maggie wondered what he would say if he were there. "You're stronger than you think," he used to say. Maggie didn't know if it was true, but she wanted to believe it. Her grandmother, without realizing it, seemed to have rekindled something in Maggie. When she returned home that night, Maggie sat with an old notebook she used for random notes. She wrote down everything she remembered from Sophia's conversation, every detail. The words on the page were frightening, but somehow, they made the situation feel more real. "If I'm going to do something, I need to be prepared," she murmured to herself. As she wrote, Maggie felt an odd sense of clarity. She was still terrified, but now there was a thread of determination mixed with the fear. Perhaps it was because, for the first time in a long while, she felt she had a purpose. Perhaps it was because her grandmother's words reminded her that she wasn't alone, even when it felt that way. Maggie knew she didn't have all the answers, but she had enough to start. She didn't yet know how Nathan would react or if Sophia would discover what she was about to do, but that no longer seemed as important. Her grandmother was right. It was time to act, even with trembling hands. At the end of the night, Maggie looked at her tired reflection in the bathroom mirror and whispered, "You can do this." She wasn't sure she believed it, but there was something undeniably powerful about saying the words out loud. It was as if she was affirming, at least to herself, that she was ready to face whatever came next. With the notebook in hand and her heart racing, Maggie decided that the next step was to talk to Nathan. The right moment still felt uncertain, but now she knew she couldn't turn back. The courage she had doubted was inside her was beginning to surface, and with it, the promise that great changes were just around the corner. The restaurant was especially busy that night. The hum of conversations filled the air, and the sound of cutlery against plates seemed amplified to Maggie, who felt more nervous than ever. In her mind, she rehearsed what she would say to Nathan Carter, like an actress preparing for the stage. But at the same time, her heart pounded so hard it felt impossible to act naturally. Maggie watched him from afar, seated at a table with a group of businessmen. Nathan seemed unshaken, focused on his discussions as if the world around him didn't exist. It was hard to believe that someone so composed could be the target of a conspiracy. To Maggie, he seemed untouchable, an almost unreachable figure. But at that moment, she knew she had something he needed to hear, something that could change everything. With trembling hands, Maggie held the check for his table. It was the perfect opportunity, but every step felt like a test of courage. Sweat formed on her palms as she approached. "Take a deep breath," she told herself before extending the check to Nathan. He glanced at her briefly, the way anyone would look at a waitress. And then Maggie spoke, almost in a whisper, "I need to talk to you. It's important." Nathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the seriousness in her tone. He hesitated, but his instinct led him to nod ever so slightly. "Wait for me outside when I'm done here," he murmured before returning to his conversation. Maggie felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. She had crossed the first barrier but knew this was only the beginning. When the evening ended, Maggie waited on the sidewalk, trying to appear casual while her heart pounded in her chest. Nathan eventually emerged, carrying the same indifferent air, though his eyes were sharp. "You have 2 minutes," he said bluntly, like someone accustomed to managing crises. Maggie took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady despite the fear. She explained what she had overheard in the bathroom, leaving out no details but refraining from exaggeration. Nathan listened with an expression of skepticism, as though trying to decide whether she was telling the truth or simply seeking attention. Maggie knew he wouldn't trust her immediately, but she had to pull him into the conversation, and quickly. "You don't have to believe me now," she said, "but at least look into it. What Sophia is planning will destroy you." There was a heavy silence, as if Nathan were weighing every word Maggie had said. Finally, he asked, "Why are you telling me this? What's in it for you?" Maggie felt her cheeks flush. The answer was on the tip of her tongue, but it was hard to say aloud, because it's the right thing to do. And that was true, even though she had no idea where it would lead her. Nathan agreed to investigate but made it clear he didn't fully trust her. "If this is some kind of game, you have no idea who you're up against," he warned, his tone sending chills down Maggie's spine. She nodded, firm. "I'm not playing, Mr. Carter. I just want you to see for yourself." As he walked away, Maggie felt her legs almost give out. Every part of her was trembling, but there was also a sense of relief. She didn't know if Nathan would act or even believe her, but she had done her part. For the first time in a long while, she felt in control of something. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. Maggie knew that encounter had changed something, not just in how Nathan viewed the world but in how she saw herself. She was still an ordinary waitress, but now she carried the weight of a dangerous truth. And somehow, she felt this was just the beginning. Nathan wasted no time. That very night, he reviewed the latest company documents, searching for any sign that might confirm Maggie's claims. The problem was that Sophia wasn't an easy opponent. Intelligent, calculating, and with access to unlimited resources, she knew how to cover her tracks. Even so, something about Maggie's story bothered him enough that he couldn't dismiss the possibility it was true. While Nathan began his investigations, Maggie tried to return to her routine at the restaurant, but nothing felt normal. She felt watched, as though the walls themselves had eyes. One day, as she left work, she found an envelope tucked under the wiper blade of her old car. Inside was a simple but threatening message. "Stay out of this." Maggie's stomach churned. Sophia knew. The tension escalated with each passing day. Maggie started noticing small incidents happening around her. Her locker at the restaurant was broken into, her drawers at home rummaged through. It was as if Sophia wanted her to know she was being watched without leaving evidence. The paranoia set in, but at the same time, something in Maggie's determination grew. She knew she had gone too far to turn back now. Nathan, on the other hand, began noticing Sophia's increasingly aggressive actions within the company. An employee with access to sensitive information was fired under suspicious circumstances. Another disappeared without notice. Nathan knew this wasn't a coincidence. He decided to ask Maggie for help reconstructing the details of the conversation she had overheard, hoping to find a solid lead. Their meetings became frequent but always in discreet locations. During one of these meetings, Nathan finally admitted something he had never told anyone. He had suspected Sophia for a long time. The problem was he never had enough evidence to confront her. "You've given me a chance to change that," he said, showing a vulnerability for the first time. Maggie realized that, despite his unshakable demeanor, Nathan was under pressure too. Their unlikely partnership deepened, even as the stakes grew higher. Maggie wasn't just an informant anymore, she was becoming an ally. And as Nathan unearthed more details, it became clear that Sophia was aware of their efforts. The game was no longer just about protecting secrets, it was about survival. As the investigation progressed, Maggie became more than just an informant. She was now a true ally. She helped Nathan piece together the puzzle, reviewing documents he retrieved from the company and pointing out inconsistencies. But with every step forward, Sophia always seemed one step ahead. This only heightened the tension, and Maggie began to wonder if they were truly prepared to face her. Sophia, sensing that something was happening, escalated her threats. Maggie received an anonymous call at home, a male voice warning, "You're playing with fire. Think about your grandmother." The fear Maggie felt was unlike anything she had experienced before. It wasn't just her life on the line now, her family was involved. Yet, instead of retreating, it fueled her resolve to fight even harder. Nathan was also facing his own set of challenges. Other board members began pressuring him, questioning his recent decisions. Sophia, with her considerable influence, was clearly manipulating the situation to isolate him. However, Nathan found an unexpected source of strength: Maggie. Her courage and determination became a constant reminder of why he was fighting this battle. In a moment of desperation, Maggie considered going to the police. But she knew that without concrete evidence, no one would believe her, and worse, it could put everyone at greater risk. Nathan agreed but assured her he was close to finding what they needed. "The one thing Sophia can't control is the truth. And the truth is on our side," he said, trying to encourage her. Maggie and Nathan formed an unlikely but powerful alliance. Both knew they were up against something far bigger than they had imagined, yet they also knew there was no turning back. Between threats and small victories, their journey grew more perilous, but also more personal. And as the final confrontation loomed closer, one question lingered: were they truly ready for what lay ahead? The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the puzzle Maggie and Nathan were assembling was much larger and darker than they had anticipated. One exhausting night, while sifting through papers Nathan had brought from the company, Maggie stumbled upon a document. It was technical, filled with numbers she couldn't fully understand, but one word leaped out at her: her father's name. A chill ran down her spine. Seeing Maggie's expression, Nathan immediately knew something was wrong. She pointed out the name to him, and together, they began to investigate. It didn't take long to uncover that the document was tied to the work accident that, according to official records, had claimed Maggie's father's life. But the deeper they delved, the clearer it became: this was no accident. The truth was devastating. Maggie's father had worked for the company when he uncovered financial irregularities involving Sophia's father. He had tried to report them but was silenced before he could expose what he had found. Maggie felt as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. For years, she had believed her father's death was a tragic misfortune. Now, she knew it was a murder disguised as an accident. The discovery unleashed a whirlwind of emotions that Maggie could barely process. There was anger, grief, and, above all, an insatiable thirst for justice. She looked at Nathan, tears in her eyes. "This isn't just about you. This is personal for me now," she said, her voice brimming with determination. Nathan understood then that, for Maggie, this fight had taken on a far deeper meaning. The revelation also weighed heavily on Nathan. His father, whom he had regarded as an honorable man, had been involved in something terrible. He tried to justify it. "I didn't know about any of this, Maggie. I was just a kid." But the words felt hollow even to him. Guilt began to gnaw at Nathan, though Maggie didn't hold him directly responsible. "You can't change the past, but you can help fix it now," she said firmly. The bond between them deepened. Maggie, who once saw Nathan as distant and unattainable, began to see his humanity. And Nathan, in turn, grew to admire Maggie's strength in the face of relentless adversity. They forged a connection rooted in shared pain and a mutual goal: to expose Sophia and clear the names of those wronged. As they worked together, Sophia seemed to sense that something was happening. She intensified her efforts, using her influence to eliminate any potential leaks. Nathan discovered that documents were vanishing from the company, while Maggie began noticing she was being followed on the streets. The pressure was mounting, but instead of backing down, they prepared to face the danger head-on. The investigation led Maggie and Nathan to a secure server within the company, where they believed the definitive evidence against Sophia was stored. But accessing it would mean crossing a point of no return. Maggie hesitated for a moment but then thought of her father and the fight he had faced alone. "I'm not giving up now," she said, with a resolve that even surprised Nathan. The server was like a digital fortress, protected by passwords and advanced security systems. Maggie and Nathan knew that breaking in would be risky, but they also knew they had no other choice. It was here that the darkest secrets lay hidden, and without them, the truth about Sophia and Maggie's father would remain buried. As they approached the decisive moment, Maggie felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her. This wasn't just about justice, it was about honoring her father's legacy and protecting those she loved. She knew that if anything went wrong, there would be no going back. But she also knew that sometimes, the only path to the truth is through the darkness. It was a dark and silent night, but Maggie and Nathan knew they were about to step into the eye of the storm. The company's headquarters, with its lights off and deserted corridors, felt like a sleeping giant guarding the secrets they were determined to uncover. Maggie felt her palms sweating as she held the flashlight. Every sound in the building seemed amplified, every step an admission of their presence. Nathan led the way, but even he couldn't hide his nerves. They had planned every move, mapped the building, and studied the security cameras. Still, there was no guarantee they would leave without being caught. Maggie followed closely behind, repeating to herself that this was for her father, for the truth, and for everyone who had suffered under Sophia. The protected server was located in a basement room, locked with an advanced security system. Nathan, with his tech expertise, had managed to bypass the initial defenses. But time was short. They knew Sophia had eyes everywhere. Every second mattered, and every mistake could be fatal. When they finally reached the room, Nathan quickly got to work, inputting codes and connecting devices to access the server. Maggie kept watch at the door, her ears tuned to any sound. The tension was unbearable. Then what she feared happened. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Maggie froze, her heart pounding. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Nathan sped up, his fingers moving faster across the keyboard, but the pressure was immense. Maggie, unsure of what else to do, grabbed a chair and positioned herself near the door, ready to block it if necessary. Time seemed to race. She could hear voices getting closer. Sophia had to know they were there. She must have known. The adrenaline kept Maggie steady, even as fear clawed at her resolve. The voices grew louder, and Maggie realized it wasn't just Sophia. At least 2 security guards were with her. "Nathan, we need to get out of here now," she said, her voice muffled with panic. Nathan looked up at Maggie, his eyes filled with tension but also determination. "Just a few more seconds. I'm almost there." Maggie bit her lip, trying to stay calm. Then the door was forced. Maggie pushed the chair against it with all her strength, trying to buy more time. "Nathan, hurry," she yelled. On the other side, Sophia barked orders at the guards, Break that door down. They can't get away. Maggie felt the force of their attempts to enter but held firm. She couldn't back down. Nathan finally let out a relieved sigh. Got it, he said, disconnecting the device with the evidence in hand. But the path to escape would be even more dangerous. With Sophia and her men on the other side, Maggie and Nathan had few options. They had to improvise, and fast. Adrenaline took over as Nathan scanned the room for an alternative exit. With the device secured, Maggie and Nathan escaped through a ventilation duct they found in the room. The space was tight and uncomfortable, but it was their only chance. They could hear Sophia and her guards entering the room just after their escape. Sophia's voice was filled with rage, tinged with desperation. "Don't let them leave here alive," she screamed. Emerging from the duct into an outdoor area, Maggie and Nathan took a moment to catch their breath. But they knew they weren't safe. Sophia wouldn't give up so easily, and the final confrontation was still to come. The escape was just the beginning. Now, it was time to expose the truth to the world, no matter the cost. The next night seemed as ordinary as any other, but for Maggie and Nathan, it marked the beginning of the end. With the device safely in their possession, loaded with evidence against Sophia, the two met in an isolated location to review everything. The files contained not only proof of financial manipulation but also a detailed history of bribes and schemes involving major corporate figures. And buried among the documents was the truth about Maggie's father's death. Maggie's hands trembled as she read the report. The words in the document were cold and calculated, as if describing a simple accident. But Maggie knew what they truly meant. Her father had been silenced because he knew too much. She swallowed hard, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. For the first time, she had confirmation of what she had always suspected, and it both devastated and strengthened her. Nathan, meanwhile, remained silent as he analyzed the documents. He realized that this was more than a personal attack. It was a conspiracy spanning years of corruption. And worse, it was a stain on his own family's legacy. He looked at Maggie, who was lost in thought, and said, "This won't erase what happened, but it can stop her from hurting anyone else." Maggie nodded, wiping away a tear. The decision to expose Sophia wasn't easy. Nathan knew it came with risks, not just for them, but for everyone at the company. Maggie, however, was resolute. "If you hesitate now, she'll keep destroying lives," she said, her determination surprising even herself. Nathan realized that Maggie was no longer the hesitant waitress he had first met. She was a force to be reckoned with. They planned every step carefully. Nathan used his influence to call an impromptu press conference, promising to reveal critical information about his company. The tension was palpable, but Maggie knew there was no turning back. She handed Nathan a copy of the report but kept another with her, just in case something went wrong. It was her safeguard against the unexpected. On the day of the press conference, Sophia tried to act first. She sent one of her lawyers to negotiate with Nathan, offering bribes and thinly veiled threats. Nathan, however, was prepared. "Tell her the truth isn't for sale," he replied, watching the lawyer leave with a defeated expression. Maggie observed the exchange with a mix of anxiety and relief. When Nathan took the stage, the room was packed with journalists and cameras. He began with a straightforward speech, acknowledging the company's recent issues but affirming his commitment to righting its wrongs. Then, with surprising composure, he presented the documents, exposing not only Sophia but the entire web of corruption she had orchestrated. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting with questions and shocked reactions. As Nathan handled the media, Maggie watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding. It was a moment of triumph but also one of tension. She knew Sophia wouldn't take this lying down, and she was right. Before the press conference ended, Maggie received an anonymous text on her phone. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Maggie took a deep breath but didn't let the fear show. Hours later, Sophia was arrested at her mansion, along with her accomplice lawyer. The images flooded social media and television, marking the end of her reign of manipulation. Maggie and Nathan knew they had won the first battle. But for Maggie, the most significant moment came when she received a call from an old friend of her father. "He'd be proud of you," the man said, his voice filled with emotion. Maggie felt a mix of relief and sadness. The truth was out, and justice had been served, but the void left by her father's loss still lingered. Nathan, sensing the weight of it, tried to comfort her. "You did what many wouldn't have had the courage to do. You didn't just save lives, you changed your own." Maggie looked at him and smiled, even as her heart carried a pain only time could heal. The cafe quickly became a gathering place for people of all ages. Maggie, who had always been invisible to the world, was now the heart of a vibrant community. People came not just for the coffee but for the story of resilience Maggie embodied. Many said they left with a sense of renewal, inspired by her courage and determination. Nathan visited the cafe a few times, always discreet but with evident pride. "You've found what you were looking for," he said during one of his visits. Maggie smiled as she poured him a cup of coffee. "I think I have, but I'm still learning. It's a process." Nathan nodded. "And that's what makes you who you are. You never stop growing." Despite the scars she carried, Maggie felt she had finally found her place in the world. The pain of losing her father still lingered, but she had learned to turn it into strength. The cafe wasn't just a business, it was a legacy, a symbol of everything she and her father represented. More importantly, it was proof that even in the darkest situations, there's always room for hope and renewal. Maggie understood that the journey never truly ends. Life would always bring challenges, but now she had something she never had before: confidence in herself and the path she'd chosen. She looked up at the cafe's sign as the evening sun set and felt a quiet pride. For the first time in a long time, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The following months brought a period of reflection and growth for Maggie. The cafe flourished, and she found herself immersed in something she loved. Still, the journey she had endured left deep marks. At night, when the quiet set in, she often thought of her father, the courage she had found within herself, and the transformation it had all brought. Maggie was no longer the same woman who had walked through the restaurant's doors months ago. Though Nathan remained a close friend, their paths diverged. He dedicated himself to rebuilding his company, implementing significant changes to ensure transparency and ethics. Maggie respected his efforts but knew her mission was different. She was focused on honoring her father's memory and creating a space where she could touch people's lives in a simple yet powerful way. One afternoon, while organizing stock at the cafe, Maggie stumbled upon an old box of her father's belongings. Among them was a notebook he used for work. The pages were filled with calculations and ideas, but scattered throughout were little notes, reminders to take Maggie to the park or buy her favorite ice cream. The tears came unexpectedly, but they weren't just of sadness, they were of gratitude. Her connection to her father grew stronger as time passed. Maggie felt that, in some way, he guided her in every decision, in every obstacle she faced. It made her realize that her journey wasn't just about justice, it was about reconnecting with her roots. Maggie now understood that her father's legacy wasn't just about his work but about the values he had instilled in her. The community surrounding the cafe also played a significant role in her personal resurrection. Maggie became a confidant to many, listening to stories and offering words of encouragement. People who had once been strangers now felt like extended family. The cafe wasn't just a business, it was a space for healing, for Maggie and for those who passed through its doors. Even so, the scars from her experience with Sophia still lingered. There were nights when Maggie wondered if she was truly safe, if the shadows of the past might return. But with each doubt, she reminded herself of what she had faced and how she had emerged stronger. "I am more than what they tried to take from me," she told herself, reaffirming her courage and determination. Nathan, during a casual visit to the cafe, remarked on how different Maggie seemed. "You didn't just survive, Maggie. You were reborn," he said with a genuine smile. Maggie laughed, slightly bashful, but she knew he was right. The woman who now ran Café Esperanza was someone who understood the value of struggle, loss, and, above all, redemption. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and hesitation, but Maggie had learned to trust herself. She now understood that courage wasn't something that simply happened, it was something cultivated day by day. And even on the hardest days, there was a strength within her that pushed her forward. Looking at the cafe's facade, illuminated by the setting sun, Maggie felt a wave of gratitude. Not just for what she had achieved, but for the people who had stood by her along the way. She knew there was still much to do, but for the first time in a long while, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. The cafe, the community, and her father's memories all became integral parts of who Maggie had become. She was no longer just the invisible waitress. She was someone who had faced the darkness and emerged with a light of her own, ready to illuminate the paths of others. Café Esperanza became more than Maggie had ever dreamed. Every day, the tables were filled with people who came not just for coffee or desserts, but for the welcoming energy of the place. Maggie dedicated herself to creating an environment where people felt seen, something she had longed for in her previous life. Every detail of the cafe was a tribute to what she had learned on her journey: courage, resilience, and the strength to face the unknown. Among the regulars were new faces and old ones, stories of triumph and confessions shared over a cup of coffee. Maggie had a natural ability to listen, absorbing these accounts with an open heart. It was as if the cafe had its own magic, a reflection of the transformation Maggie herself had undergone. "Here, you'll never be alone," became the cafe's informal motto, repeated often by its patrons. The scars of her journey remained, but Maggie learned to see them as badges of honor. On some nights, she thought about what she had endured, the threats, the fear, the loss, and still felt a pang in her chest. But now, those thoughts were accompanied by a sense of achievement. She hadn't just survived, she had changed, grown, and transformed the world around her. Nathan, who continued to follow Maggie's success from a distance, was an occasional visitor. On one of those visits, he brought her a gift, a metal plaque that read, "Where courage meets hope." Maggie smiled as she hung it near the counter, a constant reminder of what the cafe stood for. "You've shown me that wealth isn't what we own but what we build with others," Nathan said before leaving. Maggie also began giving back to the community that had supported her. She organized workshops at the cafe, teaching young people about entrepreneurship and sharing her own story as inspiration. "Never think you're too small to make a difference," she would say, her passion lighting up the room. Her journey was proof that even the smallest steps could lead to extraordinary places. The quiet nights at the cafe, when the rush subsided, were Maggie's favorite moments. With a cup of tea in hand, she loved to take in the walls adorned with photos and objects that told her family's story. In the embrace of the cozy silence, she found peace. The past, once so painful, had become part of a larger narrative, a testament to her resilience and strength. Her father's memory lived on in every corner of the cafe. Maggie had dedicated one of the walls to him, featuring a framed photograph with the words, "The truth always finds its way." Many customers asked about him, and Maggie would share the story without hesitation, turning her pain into a lesson in courage and perseverance. It was her way of ensuring his legacy would never be forgotten. Though Café Esperanza stood as a symbol of renewal, Maggie understood that her personal journey was far from over. Each day brought new opportunities to grow, learn, and make a difference. She no longer sought recognition or applause. The inner peace and connection to her own truth were more than enough. In the cafe's quieter moments, Maggie often reflected on the path that had brought her here. The journey, though fraught with danger and challenges, had also been filled with profound discoveries and reconnections. She realized that the elixir she carried wasn't just the courage she had developed but also the ability to inspire others to find their own. As she locked up the cafe on a warm summer night, Maggie looked up at the star-filled sky and felt an immense sense of gratitude for everything she had endured, everything she had built, and everything yet to come. Café Esperanza was not just a place. It was proof that even in the darkest adversities, there is always a chance to find light and transform lives, starting with your own.